Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Olivia, and I'm a recent contributor to Excel AI, and so this is my first research discussion session that I'm hosting. And before I get started and let you know what we're doing, I want to hand it over to Laura, who's the founder of Excel AI, and just have her share a little bit about what the organization does and what it's up to.
Yeah, so thank you, Olivia. So yes, my name is Laura. I'm the founder of Excel AI, and our mission is to lower the barriers to entry in engineering artificial intelligence. We've been hosting meetups through the AI and deep learning enthusiasts for almost going on 2 years now, which is really great. We started out with really just study sessions, helping people who wanted to learn about artificial intelligence to have a space to do so, to kind of get together in a group and have a collaborative environment where they could learn together. And since then, it's really kind of branched off into different areas. We now host, obviously, these online sessions, including study sessions on the deep learning book, AI research discussions, which were actually proposed by John, who's on the call here today, which is great. Glad he could join us as well. And we also host workshops. We have applied AI engineering workshops where you actually get an opportunity to get your hands dirty and play with TensorFlow and scikit-learn and different tools and APIs for doing AI and deep learning that are very popular in the industry today. And we also have these mindset and mindfulness workshops, which are hosted by one of our other partners, Jen Shea, and she'll actually be hosting another one in March, which is really great. And those are really interactive, and they're aimed to help people who are interested in getting into artificial intelligence, or who are just really passionate about AI and how AI is going to affect the world in the future. And so they're really fun and interactive, and if you're interested in joining, we'd love to have you for those as well. And lastly, we host the Demystifying AI Symposiums, which we were hosting quarterly. We have decided to actually make them biannually at this point, so we could have better quality and more really great participants and speakers to attend and kind of share their experience as entrepreneurs and engineers and researchers in artificial intelligence. So that's enough about us. I'll hand it back to Olivia, and thank you again for joining the call.
Thank you, Laura. So because we're a nice small group, I'm going to just ask us all to introduce ourselves. Before I do that, I just want to mention that this call is being recorded. If for some reason you are uncomfortable with that, just send me a private message. But otherwise, this call will be recorded. And so I'm just going to go across the screen in the order of how I see you, and I'll just ask you to say your name and where you're calling from, and what, in a sentence or so, what called you to be here tonight for this research discussion. So we'll start with John. And you've got to unmute yourself first, of course.
Hello, yes. Yeah, so I live in El Cerrito, was in Berkeley, but anyway, and I was doing neural networks long ago, kind of in its heyday, and kind of been in and out of it, and now I've been doing it for quite a while straight, just out of passion and stuff, reinforcement learning and stuff. Yeah, it's very challenging. It's very thrilling too to see it actually really start working. So, and then part of the reason I'm here right now is because I want to see how Zoom works too, and it looks pretty good so far. Yeah, I think this subject's very useful. Well, that'll be later. Next.
Oh, thank you. All right, next is Nicola. Did I say that right?
Yes. Hi, I'm Nicola. I'm calling in from South Beach in San Francisco, although late last year I moved here from the UK with my work. I'm a software developer at a consultancy called ThoughtWorks. I moved here from the UK, and in the UK, that branch of ThoughtWorks had an ethics in AI group. And I'm not sure if you're aware, But one of the big things, I think, with Brexit, and Theresa May and the government said that they want to make the UK the centre for ethics in AI in Europe. And I think with the financial sector crumbling because of Brexit, they said that they're going to invest in technology and try and make it kind of AI. I'm an ex-data journalist. I taught myself Python to work with data to actually search for stories. And I've since converted to a software developer. And now I'm looking to specialize in what brought me to journalism, which is data. So I've been doing a lot of online courses and a lot of meetups with AI. It's about getting into the business of doing it. And I have no formal computer science qualifications. And, female career converter. And so I'm looking to get on data projects and get on experience. But until then, I have to use my own time to see if I can work with other people who are experienced and do workshops. So I've done what I did in the UK, and because I'm new to this country, is to just sign up to loads and loads of meetups to meet people and see what's going on the ground. So that's me.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yeah.
Did you say you want AI to help you find stories? Is that what you said?
I was a data journalist, so I was using data stuff. ProPublica are very good at that. They're trying to catch out Twitter and Facebook algorithms. I'm looking to just get experience in AI, if it's medical, if it's data analytics, if it's fraud detection, because I want to understand how it works. And only when I understand how it works can I apply it to my own investigations that I might try to do with data that I get my hands on. So I'm just looking for hands-on experience. But I know that is being done by Scott Klein's group at ProPublica. They're really good at it. There's an article that I can share with you in the chat as well for that. They're really good.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. All right, and then we'll have Jenny go.
Here you go. Hi, yeah. My name is Jenny Jarosik. I actually live in San Francisco, and very well timed. I actually had an interview today with a major bank, and that's getting really big into AI. So I'm hoping to get that position, and so I want to get more educated on the AI space.
Great, thank you. And we heard from Laura. Laura, is there anything else that you wanted to say?
No, I think, well, I guess I could just maybe share my personal background. My background's in biology and physical science. I transitioned into the tech industry a couple of years ago and started out with general software engineering. I was doing front-end engineering for QuickBooks at Intuit. And then that's when I became really passionate about artificial intelligence and made the transition from there. And then shortly thereafter became an entrepreneur and started Excel AI. So I strongly believe that anyone that's interested in artificial intelligence can transition and can learn and grow in artificial intelligence. So that's part of why we developed this group, and I'm excited to have you guys with us.
Great. And just a little background about me. I don't have a technical background, but I've done a whole lot of community organizing around the general theme of thinking about the future and how can we organize ourselves as humans today to help co-create a world that works for everyone later on. And so that has led me to study design. And then recently I've been more interested in the conversation around artificial intelligence and specifically ethics and tackling, or at least talking about, some of the bigger ethical issues that come with the territory. So moving forward, I'm going to just share my screen here so that I can show you a little presentation that I put together. So can you see my screen? Can y'all see the screen that I'm sharing with you?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Awesome. I'm kind of new to this, so bear with me. Okay, cool. So these research discussions are happening semi-regularly, and some of them have to do with with some of the more technical aspects of machine learning and deep learning and that sort of a thing. And this one tonight is more on the theory and ethics. The link to the PDF was in the meetup. Hopefully you all got a chance to look at the paper. And I'm just going to be going through a little bit about the organization that published the paper, and I'm just going to do a very brief summary of the sections, and then I will open up the floor for discussion. So this is a paper called The Value Learning Problem. The author is Nate Soares, and he is a researcher and the executive director at the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, also known as MIRI. And they're actually local here. They're headquartered in Berkeley, California. And this particular paper was presented at an Ethics for Artificial Intelligence workshop a couple years ago, or within the last few years. And it's the 6th of 6 papers that were written about this topic. So this is just a little blurb about MIRI. If you're interested in more about what they do, you can look at their website, intelligence.org. But the Machine Intelligence Research Institute is a research nonprofit studying the mathematical underpinnings of intelligent behavior. Our mission is to develop formal tools for the clean design and analysis of general purpose AI systems with the intent of making such systems safer and more reliable when they're developed. And
I'm curious, do you know how they're funded?
I know very little, but they do have information about that on their website.
Oh, okay.
It's connected with a few other organizations that are doing such thinking and efforts towards, thinking about the future.
Right, yeah.
So I've just been looking into this arena, and there are several groups that have different opinions about how to think about ethics and artificial intelligence. And this particular organization is of the camp that that we need to be thinking about alignment and making sure that the intelligent machines that we are designing and sort of bringing into being are aligned with human values and ethics. And so this paper kind of goes into that. So this is the abstract. I'm not going to go through and read it all. It was put in the meetup page, but this basically goes into a summary of what the paper is about. And it's not just talking about the value, like the learning problem, but also just some ideas about how to go about addressing this issue. And in general, there are still some philosophical holes that need addressing and need consideration. So this summary I got from a blog post that the author did. It's a really excellent summary. Kind of helped me wrap my head around some of the deeper concepts in each of the sections. But in the introduction, it talks about how there might be negative side effects to a machine being extraordinarily effective, and that human values aren't fundamental and they can't be intuitively known to a machine. And a significant gap exists between human goals being self-defined and simple formal specification when programming machines. So that's what he goes into in section 2. And then in the next few sections, there's some exploration of frameworks through which the system could be constructed to learn concrete goals via induction on labeled data and details possible pitfalls and early open problems, and also exploration into methods by which systems could be built to safely assist in this process without relying on a programmer to have to go in and hand code everything. And then he kind of ends with posing the question, like, is it possible to construct an intelligent system which could act in the interests of not only the programmers and the people who are training it, but also all of the people that it might interact with and all of life. So this is kind of the the meat of what the paper is about. And I have some thoughts, and what I'm really curious about is just is what you think. Like, what are your thoughts, and what's your take on the value learning program, and anything else that you might want to share. So what I'm going to do this is I'm going to see if I can end the screen share. Come back here. Okay. And if you have something to say, you can just unmute yourself, and let's have fun with it. Would anybody like to go first?
Yeah, I can jump in. Oh, sorry, Nicola. Well, I just wanted to kind of start off with saying, obviously, ethics and artificial intelligence is such a major and intense field right now, and it's being explored in so many incredible ways. And I think this paper really touches on one of the key factors, right, which is, as you said, how can a machine make sure it takes into consideration society as a whole, rather than just the experience or the beliefs or values of those who specifically engineered it, right, or developed it. And my initial reaction, of course, is it takes me back to Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics. And I'm curious how you guys feel about that. If those laws of robotics actually do stand true, and how they might relate to what was covered in this specific paper. What do you guys think?
I'm not sure I'm familiar with those. Sorry, go ahead.
I think therefore, I think probably leave it to Laura to talk about Asimov's rule of robotics. I'm familiar with it, but I think it should probably be said.
Yeah, definitely. So the three really basic and straightforward laws of robotics. The first one, a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Two is a robot must obey orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And then three is a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. And there are actually a couple more, but those are the three main ones. And they were mostly featured in his writing. Specifically, I, Robot is a really well-known piece of literature that was put out that revolves around these laws of robotics, and specifically shows how the laws of robotics do not necessarily stand the test of time or of machines, and that really it's incredibly complicated for a machine or a robot to follow these laws, given all the different things that can happen in the world. So based on, now that you guys know the laws of robotics, how do you?
That was one of the things when I was reading this article that popped into my head. But Asimov's law they outcome based, not implementation. And this seemed to be about the moral framework with which the implementation for a learning outcome is designed. And for me, the paper was very interesting because technically everyone's calling, neural networks and AI black box algorithms. The fact that we don't put in specific rules, it builds it itself. And as long as the outcome have the predictions with which businesses find useful or outcomes are useful, that's what we're optimizing for. This is done on a level that's very much about ethics. I would like if they went into some constructive computation of like how to implement it. It is black box. The whole point of the neural networks is it's not like a human brain. We can kind of sometimes delve in and in discussions figure out how we draw these conclusions, especially moral conclusions, a lot of it based on experience. But even if a computer develops the same outcome, their way of getting it might be completely different. A lot of people think, oh, intelligent systems is trying to simulate the human brain. It is not. It's not going to be a way to look into a human mind. It is going to be something of its own design. And I think that's kind of what scares people. The things that I've read previously that have come to mind, if people have not gone to the website, this is made by MIT Media Lab, called Moral Machine. I think it's moralmachine.org. The psychological test and what paper was done, the main one which people know is called the trolley problem, which has then been abstracted to what people are now beginning to think about and beginning to talk about in terms of AI and ethics is self-driving cars. Because what does the self-driving car do if its brakes fails? Because a car is not a perfect machine, its brakes will fail. And it's an abstraction of the trolley problem, and that's what the moral machine does. It gives you choices about what to do in that situation, and it tells you how your choices at the end of it align with the majority. The majority of people tend to kill fat men. So it's like the future is not good for fat men in self-driving cars. But one thing that was interesting is there was a Radiolab podcast talking about the self-driving car dilemma. And one of the things that struck me, which I didn't think about, was this pre-programmed judgment that does not sit well with people. If I'm in a self-driving car, it does not sit well with me that scenarios on choosing one life over another are pre-programmed in, even if I'm never in that scenario. As human beings, we kind of go, oh, it was God's will, it was chaos. We don't like to think that things are pre-programmed. And the whole point with self-driving cars is they're like, are they going to be pre-programmed with these scenarios? And I'm wondering if by the time we get to there, is it going to be implemented not on these rules-based scenario, but on a value learning problem scenario, because those moral judgments of what to do in that situation is flexible? And is it going to have to learn how our moral sort of stance is changing? That's one way to get over the fact that it does not sit well with people. It just does not sit well with people that rules-based decisions on life and death outcomes will be pre-programmed into artificial intelligence systems. And will it then be better if they're like, oh, it's not pre-programmed, it's just trying to learn the value based on its observation of what we in society think about? I'm not sure. But yeah, Moral Machine, if you go to it, it's actually really quite scary, the decisions you have to make. And so I'm like, well, would not want this pre-programmed? Would I be happier to say, oh, and as a developer, if this was just given to me by some board of director having gone through some EU human rights law, if they were like, okay, I need you to pre-program this based on gender, age, and athleticism, I would not want to be responsible for that. But will I be happier, and will that be better if we hand it off to a value learning, do what I mean based sort of necessarily address? But that's kind of what got me thinking. If I'll also find the podcast on the driverless dilemma, which goes through the trolley problem as well. So let me hand it over to someone else to speak, and I'll go find that.
Thank you for sharing that, Nicola. You brought up a lot of really great points. And one thing that I want to add with that is, it can be scary. I have played with the Moral Machine site previously. But to think that us as humans, we have to make those decisions, right? If we're driving down the road and something happens and our brakes give out, right? We have to make those same decisions on who potentially we would kill or how we would protect ourselves in that situation. And we can only make that decision based on our own past experiences and our own internal programming, right? And so, so it is scary to think that an autonomous vehicle would have to do that. But it's also scary to think about human beings having to make those decisions based on their lives and their values, and those potential ethics and values being different from our own. So I want to add that. Does anyone else want to jump in and share their thoughts?
Yeah,
Jenny.
Yeah, this is Jenny. Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate, but I think to some extent there will have to be some of that built in. I'm not quite sure, how viable it is to have a self-driving car, for example. If you don't know how it's going to behave, I think it's a real dilemma, and I absolutely get what you're saying. It's a dilemma, and I think that the self-driving car industry is really trying to address this, because they can't, to your point, a lot of people are having reservations around it, and understandably so.
I thought, this is John, I thought that was a great line of thinking there, Nicola. One thing about this paper, though, it's talking about superhuman too, which to me is getting a little bit too far out, because all these arguments, well, I don't even really want to get into that right now, because that's beyond, in a way, what we're talking about.
No, the thing I really liked about mentioning superhuman intelligence is they brought in game theory. They were like, superhuman intelligence, it will not be in their benefit to destroy us. It will still be in their benefit to work with us. But looking on history, will it be like a colonized type dystopia? If you watch like these like sci-fi movies of like Skynet and stuff like that.
My point is, it's a whole nother discussion in a way. I mean, yeah, but when you talk about self-driving cars and stuff, it's that's obviously a lot more tangible, and we can have discussions that can go on for a while and carry a line of thinking. When you talk about superhuman, it's like all bets are off. I mean, what do you really mean? And that's where I get kind of incredulous when I read some of these papers. I mean, I know that like there's like actually a guy I know quite well did this paper on self-deluding, super smart, super intelligent, whatever. If you had an agent with infinite computational ability, and the ability to change itself, then he proved that it would end up deluding itself. It would actually change its perception to satisfy its goals. I don't even know the details of that, but anyway.
One thing I would like to ask the group is for me, the big ethics in AI is bias in the data for the learning outcome. The fact that it's much more difficult to visually recognize people with dark skin, because our data is biased towards those who have the power to produce data and have access to the internet. It's a developed world, first world, white male hierarchy in terms of the importance of data. That's something, if we don't deal with that now, when it's a simple AI based on outcomes with which we can weight or at least bootstrap some samples, which we don't have that much of, female minorities, what happens if it's learning about morality and do what I mean? Is that going to amplify the problem of, because morality in the moral framework is controlled by those in power? And is that actually going to make the situation worse than if we had something that's based on a rules-based prediction outcome? That's something that it didn't necessarily bring up, but if this is the way they want things to go, I see that as making the problem worse than better.
You said you had a question for the group. Can you rephrase what the question is?
The issue that we have now with a lack of diversity in data, a lack of true equal representation, that is already coming to the foreground when we have a prediction-based artificial intelligence system. Do people think that if we go to a moral framework, learn what I mean and learn what is valuable, is that going to make the situation worse because it's going to learn what is valuable to those already in power?
I think potentially. But before I say the other thing I was going to say, I just want to acknowledge that we might get kicked off. I had a 40-minute time set up. So Laura sent in the chat window, she sent another link. If we get kicked off in the next 6 minutes or so, then you can just rejoin with that link. So I would just copy and paste that just in case. It might be that it'll be fine, but so yeah, could it be worse, to answer your question? I think potentially, but I also think that while we're still working with relatively simple intelligence, I think we're at a very, very important time. There's somebody, I forget her name. Her first name is Joy. She recently did a TED Talk talking about her. She works at MIT, speaking about how like she brought up exactly the problem that you brought, which is that a facial recognition software couldn't recognize her face because she had dark skin. And so she started this whole initiative of debiasing code and is like being all activist about it. And I think that's super important to just bring more voices to the conversation and empower more people with the knowledge and with the real issues that are at stake. And I think what's more important than the technology, and this is just my own opinion, but I do believe that the more that humans in general can confront our own like biases and our own assumptions about our morals and ethics, that is where the real work is, because so many people have so many different ideas about what is moral, or what values should be prioritized, and a lot of it is unconscious, and a lot of it is just passed down from our ancestors and previous generations and religion and culture. And I think that humanity has a really big task to do, which is to take a good hard look at our conditioning and ask ourselves what is really important. And that's something that I believe is more important than figuring out how to make the self-driving car work.
I have to agree with you, Olivia. And I did post a link also to Joy's TED Talk specifically on this topic. It's something that honestly we're working on as well here at Excelii. A few of the initiatives that we have started in this past year. One is the Latinx and AI Coalition, and one of the goals of that group is to actually start curating open source data sets that are more representative of different populations that aren't necessarily represented within kind of the homogeneous tech sphere at the moment. And also to bring more representation of individuals working within the space to be more present in like AI conferences and events, and to have, to be invited more to speak at these different spaces. So that's definitely something that is incredibly valuable. And there are other groups that are, having initiatives right now to drive that impact, and Joy is one of them. She started her own initiative as well to make an open source data set for facial recognition, specifically that's representative of many different people and not just the homogeneous kind of white male population. If those are the only individuals that are developing artificial intelligence, then yes, unfortunately, when it starts, AI will be a reflection of them, and how that affects society is going to be a problem. We've already seen that in other examples, right? Microsoft allowed the Tay Twitter bot to to basically feed off of internet trolls, and it started spouting racial slurs. And then you also had Google originally, unfortunately, had its image recognition data set start tagging Black people as gorillas because it wasn't trained properly on images of Black people and identified correctly. So unfortunately, these missteps do happen, and they've been proven to happen already. But fortunately, once they do happen, enough acknowledgement and kind of limelight comes to the attention of these tech companies that they recognize it and they do start making a change. The hope would be that the change would happen before the misstep, right? Waiting though, for the question of, will the values of kind of the tech elite be built into artificial intelligence? And is that a concern? I would say yes. I mean, if you look at the values of those developing AI engineering, oftentimes, or at least Silicon Valley, let's just say Silicon Valley, the values of the individuals that work within Silicon Valley are very different than the values of the rest of the world, right? And oftentimes that's why the things that are coming out of Silicon Valley are things of convenience, right? They're apps of convenience, and they're not really a reflection of the rest of the world, or they're not necessarily trying to solve problems for everyone. And so that is a major issue and something that needs to be addressed. And interview that I had with an individual that works in AI in Germany, we were specifically talking about this problem. And one of the main questions he brought up was, well, how do you fix that? How do you fix a homogeneous group of people who are basically disconnected from the rest of the world, and how do you get them to start solving problems for the rest of the world? And one of the suggestions we came up with in our talk was that honestly there might need to be like an exchange program that happens for people that live in these bubbles, to get them to spend time in the world of others and kind of walk in their shoes and see what their struggles are. That way they can start thinking more innovatively. But also we need to get more people from different backgrounds and experiences trained in doing the work, the tech work, and get them in management roles and get them working as engineers, so they are also equipped and capable of solving problems for themselves and their own communities. So I hope that kind of answers your question. And if anyone else wants to jump in, you're welcome to.
Yeah, I find myself kind of curious to know if there was just any other thoughts or insights that jumped out as you all were reading the paper. And I'm happy to continue this thread of conversation as well, but just to make room if there was other thoughts that wanted to be expressed, because we have about 15 more minutes on the call, and this is starting to get juicy.
One thought that demarcates the kind of AI that you were just talking about, and making it more socially even, but getting back to the more superhuman, or at least in that direction, more powerful. And so the key criterion would be the ability to change its own programming. And I don't have a lot to say about that. It's not something I think about much, but clearly, I mean, it seems to me that if they have the ability to change any of their programming, then all bets are off in a way. But if even if you say, well, even if they don't, at least they're not engineered by humans with the ability to change themselves. If they are indeed superhuman, whatever that could possibly mean, they would certainly figure out how to do it. So, and then it becomes, well, that's very dangerous, and who knows? I mean, it just seems to me all bets are off. Unless if you mean by superhuman, they are like human, but just like humans plus, where they have, the same sensibilities or similar sensibilities or something like that.
Can I ask a clarifying question for you, John?
Yeah.
When you say superhuman, are you talking about the place in the paper where they referred to super intelligence, or did I miss what you were referring to?
Yeah, maybe I just see. I rewrote what I read in my head and to what I wanted it to. No,
that's okay. I was just giving her time.
I was thinking it said superhuman. Was it saying? I'm pretty sure it said superhuman.
It's possible it did, which is why I'm asking.
Yeah,
because I couldn't find it. I couldn't find the place where it talked about that.
Oh, I'm gonna do it. I'm curious. I'm gonna do a quick text search.
Yeah, I know. I'm like,
oh, super intelligent. I see that. Yeah. Oops, I just rotated my page by mistake. Super intelligent, super intelligent, super intelligent. Super intelligent. Yeah, no superhuman. Well, I'm going to do that famous line from the old Saturday Night Live. Never mind. No, but I mean, okay, super intelligent. I think when people see that, when I think the natural thing is to think, well, usually it's put in the context of being smarter than human. So if the singularity is put in that context. So if you build a machine that's smarter than the designer, then it can build an even better one, et cetera. And that, leads to an exponential increase in intelligence really fast. So, but, the thing is that the first things that are coming out, and that are coming out now, I mean, we have superhuman, Atari game players, right? They call them superhuman, but they're extremely, I guess you would say, autistic. A very, very, very narrow domain of knowledge. And I think that it's going to be that way for a really long time. Well, who knows? Who knows what can happen? But yeah, so, I don't know. I haven't even thought about what this paper said in terms of that perspective. I've just been thinking after I sort of scanned through it, but I think it has. That's one of the main questions, and then the other question is, can it reprogram itself? And and frankly, I'm not quite up on that as much as I should be, but some of the implications of that. But it just seems to me on the face of it that, again, all bets are off. And, I don't know what is the quality. What do they mean by reinforcement? I mean, we have pain and pleasure and stuff like that, but our agents just have numbers now, and there's no whatever that means. I mean, the tendency is to anthropomorphize, and it really doesn't make any. Oh gosh, I could go on and on. I'm just going sort of in random directions, but.
Well, you brought up some really good points, John, that I would also like to touch on a little bit. Specifically, with the idea that these intelligent machines or super intelligent machines are really designed to solve one problem, right, or to carry out a specific task. And you even see that with something like autonomous vehicle or most of the robotics that are designed for automation, right? When you're thinking about the type of systems or agents that are developed for carrying out like manufacturing, right? Or, other areas of machine learning that have already been built into white collar work, right? The spam filtering on your email inbox, like that has one very specific task to identify whether something is spam or not. Bots that are built for doing basic chat bots. Normally they're designed to answer questions about a specific topic or, to give you the latest news or weather report, right? They have a very specific task. And so at what point are we actually going to develop a machine that has the ability to kind of be adaptive in the world in the way that humans are, that, you know, they have enough experience in many different areas that they're not really just superhuman in one way. And is that even possible, right, to develop a machine that is adaptive in that way as a human is, and what would that take?
I think a lot of, I'm sorry. I think a lot of the arguments in the paper assume this super, you know, it's not this super narrow mind. It's something that can act in a broader perspective. I think that's a kind of underlying assumption. I would have to reread it, you know, with that perspective, but
actually, if you use the spam bot, so that's something that's kind of well known. It's a binary outcome, spam, not spam. You can understand how it kind of reads things and gathers things. If you're looking, so that's just kind of the traditional way. For me, the value learning problem is like, well, ultimately what we're trying to do in detect spam is save your time with all the email. Just tell you what it is you need to know when you need to know it. And for me, that mimics a person, that mimics a secretary, a long-standing secretary to some CEO that understands his or her moods, that understands the schedule for the day. And they come in and they've opened all of their letters and they just give them a summary of what they need. The interesting thing with that is that's a two-way process. Like, that person learns what the person they're working for kind of really wants and needs before they do. And for me, it's like, how do you interact with an AI that isn't like that? Like, I'm like, how would Google make that into Inbox or Gmail? You would have to build it into Google Home. You'd have to build it into Siri. You'd have to build it into something that knows so much about you, that can even manage your moods. And it's like, well, if that's in the cloud and not in a person, to me, that's open to so much more manipulation and privacy issues. And to me, that's the value learning problem that makes it more frightening.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I like the idea of, I mean, well, I'm intrigued about the idea of, you know, what would be a sort of a shortcut to understanding humans. And that would be, certainly, you would think would be kind of one way to get the data a little more directly. Yeah. I mean, I think it's ultimately going to be just these agents looking on the internet, looking at reams of videos and trying to build a model of the world based on that would probably be the easiest way to get the data. It's probably going on right now. No, I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting though.
So one section 4 of the paper specifically talked about modeling intent. And I think that what you guys have been saying does have a lot to do with intent as well, right? It's, you know, when you talk about moods, an individual's mood versus their actions and what might be relevant to that specific individual or a group of people, right? Or a community of individuals, and how that might compare to the intention or needs or moods of another group or culture of people, and how would an intelligent agent be able to kind of modify their behavior based on those different groups or those different needs. So I think that is something really valuable in exploring and thinking about, and also considering, like, oftentimes human beings don't necessarily act based on their intent, at least not outwardly, right? Sometimes you might feel one way, but then to the outside world, you depict a different version of yourself, or you act in a way that may be harmful, even though you had good intentions, right? And so what happens if the intelligent machine or the intelligent agent sees this behavior? Like, will it be able to identify your actual intention versus your behavior? And then what happens when the machine actually has a similar experience where its intention was to help, but it ended up causing harm, right? And that's something that we've seen now happen by these AI systems that have been developed by some other tech companies, right? When Google developed that facial recognition software, it wasn't meant to tag Black people as gorillas, right? It was meant to help people, identify their friends and their neighbors and their, their family members and their loved ones. But unfortunately, the action did not reflect the intention. So I think that's a really good point. What do you guys want to say to that, or how do you feel about that?
Well, I think all we're saying, a lot of things we're saying here is, yeah, we want, AI to develop in a moral way, and we don't want it to kind of morph to something that's very dangerous. And unfortunately, if it sees those kind of behaviors, unfortunately, I hope it doesn't adopt them, because that would make it more dangerous. So, I mean, I think it's really tricky stuff. It's really tricky stuff. So I'm glad I'm really glad you guys are having this forum. So, so there'll be more people that can get involved in the conversation and get involved with, how AI is evolving.
I think in section 3, the 3 parts, corrigibility, ontology identification, and ambiguity identification, just having those 3 sections as the 3 frameworks for which they're doing, I find that's what's really, really interesting for me, because it's very difficult for us to break down sort of the pillars and the structures and the principles with which we become principled, moral human beings. It's difficult for us to unpick it. And I'm not saying that we do this, but that's the sort of things that they're proposing for building these models. And would be interesting to see for each of those 3 things, how do we do that with code? How do we do that with engineering? What does it look like? And is it dependent on the output? Because if it's dependent on the output, then that really defies the purpose, because you'll have to have a human being overseeing it. And kind of like, it would have to be picked up by a human being. Oh my God, they're tagging that Black person as a gorilla. It's the sort of thing, how do you then, and the whole point of a smarter than human intelligent system is that it should not have humans having to teach it. So for me, it's like, how do we put this corrigibility, ontological identification into the machine learning process that doesn't need a human to oversee it? Again, this is not a technical piece, but it would be interesting to try and find anything that's sort of written about that, that's kind of more technical. I think that would be really interesting to try and match that up.
I want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to piggyback on that. I don't know the answer, but about that question of how do we line that up technically without having a person overseeing it, makes me think about how we come to moral decisions, and how are we made as moral beings, and that process of growing up as a human with a family and a society, and sort of being imprinted upon subconsciously. That's a process that some people spend their entire lives and careers learning about and studying. And I don't know the exact numbers on this, but my understanding is that few of those people are the ones who go into engineering and designing AIs. And so I find myself interested in where can we get the experts on the opposite sides of the spectrum to talk to each other? Where can we get an expert on human behavior, not just the psychologists, but also, the people who study deeply into the nature of the human condition, like philosophers? And how do we bring sort of applied philosophy into the conversation of the technical aspects of it? Because, like I said, the folks who might have the deepest insights into how to go about the problem of morality, or how to engineer a machine without needing to oversee it, those sorts of people might not understand the technicalities. So I just see that there's a seat in future AI teams that includes experts on both sides of the spectrum, but also folks in between who can translate.
Yeah, sounds good to me. I just try to thinking, sort of some of the practical aspects of that. And I think it's very challenging because, I mean, you said, how would you engineer it in there? And the problem is that these are data driven. They're not engineered, except that the data is the collection of it is engineered. So in that sense, it's very difficult. But I mean, you can. I mean, if you just have an agent looking at the internet and choosing what to watch, that choosing what to watch is part of it. Choosing what to process, there's so much data. And there, I guess you would, unless you're talking about a machine unless it's just looking at everything, and then you're talking about super intelligent, and then what the hell is it really trying to do? Is it perpetuating? Maybe it decides that intelligence in general is more important than humanity, and maybe that is a good thing for it to decide, maybe. Anyway, sorry, I got carried away there. But the key point is that it's data driven. So it's not easy to engineer things in there, and then if you're going to engineer the collection of data, that can be very tricky itself. I mean, because especially if you're talking about these super smart things, there has to be a concomitant huge amount of increase in data to support that. So that the collection of the data, the deciding what to be should be good data itself should be automated. And it becomes more and more leveraged, I guess. So it becomes even more of a challenge, I would think. But
to bring up a
go ahead.
Sorry, John. Thank you. To bring up a very simple example that hopefully everyone can understand. So you mentioned ProPublica previously. They put out a really well-known, well, at least well-known to us, article about how machine learning is being used specifically when trying to judge the risk of recidivism of criminals in different areas, in different counties. And it's actually now these types of machine learning algorithms are being used in most police counties, which is kind of scary. But what they found is oftentimes the way the algorithm gives its output, it actually shows that people of color, specifically Black people and Hispanic people, are given a higher risk of recidivism, despite the fact that the crimes that they committed might be less dangerous than the crimes that were committed by their white counterparts, and those white counterparts are given a lower risk of recidivism, even though it's actually proven that they are more likely to go back to jail and commit these crimes repeatedly. And so they looked at this study over a long period of time. And the really tricky part is the data that they were using with these specific machine learning algorithms weren't specifically identifying race. And so it was really confusing to a lot of people, and it became this black box situation where they didn't quite understand, well, how is the algorithm specifically falsely identifying Black and Hispanic people as more likely to commit these crimes if, even the data isn't necessarily identifying race. And so that's part of the process, is understanding, well, what is the data actually a reflection of, and what's happening in this specific example, right? And so the first part was that the data that they were collecting, the populations in which they were collecting this data from, right, the specific neighborhoods that they were collecting the data from, even though they didn't specifically identify Black people versus Hispanic people versus white people, the population of individuals that that were Black or Hispanic that lived in these areas that were more densely populated by crime, right, where more crime was committed, but then these areas that were actually more policed, oftentimes, those individuals, unfortunately, were policed more often, so they would often get caught more often than white individuals that were committing these similar crimes in different areas, right? So that's one major issue there. And so despite them not specifically identifying Black versus white versus Hispanic, because they looked at specific areas where these individuals lived and were more densely populated, that automatically tipped the scale, unfortunately, against these individuals. And in that way, it's more of a reflection of society than it is an issue necessarily with the data. And so as an individual, as an engineer or a data scientist or a statistician, when you're looking at these data sets and you're trying to figure out, well, what's happening? What are the trends that are being shown in this data set? And how do we prepare for the output to be skewed based on bias that already exists within society for these machine learning algorithms? One way that many statisticians do at this point is they actually will downweight data that disproportionately shows trends in one direction or the other, right? So if they have, for example, more data on a specific group of people and less data on another group of people, they will upweight the relevance of the data from the smaller population and downweight the relevance of the data from the larger population. And this way, hoping to kind of normalize everything and get data that's representative of everyone. The problem with that specific method is that when you're upweighting data of a smaller population or a smaller group, sometimes that's still not necessarily representative of everyone that identifies, or is of that specific group as a whole. And so you're still potentially skewing your data set. And so in this way, it causes a lot of problems. So unfortunately, the only true solution to this problem is having more data that is representative of all these individuals, right, from different backgrounds, from different experience, from different life experiences, and then using that and feeding that into the algorithm to get a better picture of what's actually happening, in the industry or in whatever problem is that you're trying to solve. So that's how you do it from an engineering or data scientist or statistician's perspective. And unfortunately, that data isn't always necessarily available. So the only way to do that is to create these open source data sets. Yeah. So I think that's all I have to add on that topic. If anyone else
that article is one of the articles that I always share with people. I love ProPublica. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. And that's like an example that I use to say that you cannot say that your algorithm is race blind, is gender blind, just because it doesn't specifically ask for it because of confounding variables. And that's kind of what I use as an example of kind of showing you that it can be baked into the data. And then there was whenever in my company, you can be called in to help interview of a higher pay grade than them. So I've been involved with interviews with like principal consultants that have experience managing data projects. And one thing I always ask them is, what processes do you use to ensure there is not bias? And the vast majority of them really don't have anything that they do. And so they often ask me, well, what would you suggest? And I would always say reverse engineer. Whatever you're testing, be it a job application platform, be it quitting smoking platform, losing weight platform, If you, whatever data you collect gender, collect race, don't feed it into the algorithm. But what you do is then you get those actual people to come in, use the platform, measure your outcome, and see some statistical significance from your outcome. Can it then predict their race and their gender? Just to reverse engineer what you did. Even if you didn't feed it in, can it, the outcome of what you've done, be a predictor of it? And it does involve like having people in, it does involve collecting stuff beforehand, even if you're not feeding it in. But that's something that I would like to actually see and test out. And I wonder if there's, any sort of group or body or anyone writing about not just kind of algorithm practices and, the data engineers practices, but the whole kind of enterprise, the managers, the CEOs, the business of developing things, whether there is like a best practice of how to ensure. And it can be something like, look at the data that you're feeding in, look and see if there's if there's only a small proportion of one set representative, and saying things like, if you just bootstrap the sample or weight it, that might not help the issue because your sample might already be non-representative of that group anyway. And I'm just wondering, does anyone know if there's like if it's that intelligence.org that you were talking about, does anyone do like not just academic journal papers or engineering, but like business practices and project manager practices for this?
Well, I'm curious about when you said that you would do reverse engineering. So you were saying that if you looked at what it output and tried to predict, like race, or for example, and are you saying that if you could predict the race, then it's the bias is baked into it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so the example I would use is job applications on online ads. If they know you're female, which they generally do from Facebook, from Twitter, from everything, knows your gender more so than anything else, they will advertise for jobs with lower pay, even for the same position. And they will show you this, which gives women the impression that the average pay for the same job is less. And it's the sort of thing where if you're writing that ad platform of what to present, if you did not take in gender, and then you sit and you have the people that you originally input, and then you actually go, is there statistical significance lowering of the average pay when that person is female, then that bias has been baked in, even if you did not take that in from LinkedIn. For example, if you built all of that from LinkedIn, you actually have picked it up from things like Facebook, on things that on other things like that, because now it's getting really complicated because we're getting data that's shared across different platforms. So we don't know if there's bias baked into the other one. So that's why I'd be like, it is a black box. So just try and reverse engineer it to see if that outcome is there. And it might be not just, you're giving them jobs with lower salaries, you're giving them jobs with smaller companies, you're giving them jobs that have less bonuses. Like, there's so many things that you can do, and that's very time consuming, and I can see why businesses would just not want to do that. So that's why I think there almost has to be like a legal body or ethics body that makes them do it, because it's not good for their bottom line to spend that amount of time doing it.
So to answer your question, there isn't one specific group that's like an ethical AI organization that is coming up with this yet. I think that it's definitely something that's needed, like for like a certification program, right? An ethical AI certification program to actually be developed and put in place. There are a few tech companies who are trying to advise on what the proper way to improve ethical data analysis. For example, Accenture is one of them. They've been doing a lot of work in this area, and they are specifically a business tech consulting, really large business tech consulting company, right? So they have a lot of influence, and they have written some white papers specifically on this topic. I can try to share some as well in the chat. But I think that now this has become such a large topic that not only are large tech companies trying to approach this issue, but also government agencies and entities are really trying to approach this issue as well. But they, of course, always claim limited resources and try to encourage the researchers and those kind of on the front lines, right? The engineers and the tech companies to do the work and to actually put something together. So I think that a lot of people want this to happen, and that, it's on many people's minds, but unfortunately there isn't like one governing body yet to kind of oversee this work specifically being put out there. But there are other groups like, the World Economic Forum has developed a lot of work around this and has spread the word on these specific issues, and even trying to bring light to, what happens when you're doing data analysis or data collection, and how to potentially prevent unethical artificial intelligence. So those are things to look into for sure. But yeah, it would be nice if someone developed similar to like a LEED certification, or like the way that, organic produce has a certification process, but for artificial intelligence engineering, right? Yeah, that would be amazing.
I do know that Miri, the one that published this paper that we're talking about, is connected with some other bodies who are deeply involved in talking about AI risk and thinking about what's important to think about, and sharing that with governmental bodies and that sort of a thing. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I am aware that there's sort of a network of organizations that are deeply concerned with AI safety and implications on a global scale, and kind of are tapped into what other countries who are developing artificial intelligence are positioned on that as well. So I'm going to see if I can find a link to share with you on that as well.
On a somewhat tangential, fairly related note, some people are working on AI systems, neural network systems, and so forth that are able to, in some sense, explain how they got their answers. So I don't know if that's exactly relevant, but it seems like it might be somewhat relevant to what you're talking about. Like
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. If you have any links, please put it in the chat. I'd love to read it.
Well, I know that the Berkeley company, Bonsai, I think that's one of their mantras. BONSAI, like the tree. It says Bonsai AI. But I don't think you'll find much specific there. But yeah, it's something I haven't looked into. I know it's a really tough. I mean, that's the rub of data-driven AI, is that you don't know how it's working. I mean, deep neural networks, and I mean, you can see some features and stuff, but in many cases, I mean, even if you look at those, you don't really know. I mean, that's for pictures, and pictures you can kind of relate to, but when you talk about all these other things, it's how can you possibly understand what these features are for? I mean, not to say that you can't, and we're neural networks and we do it. So, well, we do it at least superficially, I guess. But anyway, and that's all I have to say.
Great. I want to start bringing it into wrapping up. And so if there's any like last burning comments or questions, or maybe thoughts on the paper or things that have come up so far, now would be the time to introduce that.
So I just want to say thank you, Olivia, for taking the time to prepare and host this session for us. Thank you for choosing the paper specifically. I think this is a really great one, and we were able to kind of talk around a lot of the different topics that were brought up within the paper itself, and then also on a larger societal scale. So I just want to say I appreciate your time and effort putting this together for us today.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you, Laura, for giving me the opportunity and the platform. Laura was one of the first people that I found when I started looking into this whole topic, and she's got a lot of really amazing things going on. And yeah, this side of it feels really important to me, and I really appreciate all of you taking time out of your evening to share your thoughts. And I'm definitely, I feel like my brain has a lot of things to chew on, and the value learning problem in general is something that I'm going to keep thinking about. And I'm also really appreciative of all of the links and resources. This is another great thing about meeting up to have these discussions, right? Is that we get to learn from each other and hear what we've been researching and chewing on. It's just a great way to build community and to increase each other's knowledge base.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Great.
Any
Thanks,
last
everybody.
thoughts? Okay. Well, thank you so much, and everybody have a great night. And I guess we'll announce the next research session soon. So maybe we'll see you at the next one.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.